Have you ever felt invisible in a room where everyone assumed you didn't belong? Imagine boarding a plane, looking forward to your rightful seat, only to find someone else occupying it with an air of entitlement that says, "You're not supposed to be here." This isn't just about a chair on a flight. It's about recognition, respect, and dignity. Now, picture yourself standing quietly, knowing you are right, but surrounded by judgmental eyes, cameras, and murmurs. You have a choice. Do you raise your voice in anger, retreat silently, or hold your ground with calm authority? What would you do if every move you made was being recorded and scrutinized by strangers? Millions of strangers watching for how you handle injustice. Could you remain composed when entitlement confronts truth? Could patience and dignity become your most powerful weapons in the face of arrogance? Step into the shoes of someone who has faced this scenario. A Black CEO in a world that often underestimates their presence, and imagine the tension, the pressure, and the moral stakes. Join us as we follow Malik Jefferson on Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847, where a simple seat became a stage for courage, authority, and integrity. Witness how one quiet act of truth reshaped perceptions, challenged entitlement, and sent a message the world couldn't ignore. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the full story. The morning sun had barely started spilling its golden rays across Los Angeles International Airport, glinting off polished floors and the occasional rolling suitcase. The terminal buzzed with life families saying hurried goodbyes, business travelers tapping through email on their laptops, the rhythmic clatter of heels and luggage wheels echoing against the high glass ceiling. Among the throng walked Malik Jefferson, his posture calm, deliberate, almost regal in its quiet confidence. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a subtle navy tie. Over his shoulder, a worn leather briefcase carried documents, digital tablets, and carefully concealed reminders of his morning routines. Passers-by might have seen just another businessman, early for a flight, but Malik was anything but ordinary, his boarding pass in hand. 2A, first class. He moved with the grace of someone accustomed to both scrutiny and authority, yet beneath the composed exterior, a familiar tension lingered. He had flown countless times over the years, often facing subtle judgments, sideways glances, and microaggressions, even when his credentials and status spoke louder than anyone could ignore. But today felt different. There was a weight in the air, a quiet anticipation he couldn't yet define. Malik paused at the entrance to the premium cabin, the polished chrome and the soft leather seats reflecting the early sunlight. The faint scent of freshly poured coffee mingled with the subtle aroma of champagne bottles chilling nearby. His short, cropped hair caught the light. His eyes, dark and focused, scanned the cabin. Everything appeared routine at first glance. Yet, as he approached row 2, the world shifted. A woman lounged in 2A, her designer tote sprawled across the armrest as if claiming the space as her own. Blonde, mid-40s, with a smile that seemed rehearsed for gala photos or business networking events. She did not look up from her phone as Malik approached. "This is my seat," she said, voice calm but laced with condescension. "People like me always sit by the window." The words landed like a sudden gust of cold wind. Malik's pulse did not spike outwardly, but internally. A flash of recognition sparked. He had encountered this before, people who assumed entitlement based on appearances, who measured worth superficially, who thought authority and presence could be ignored simply because it was inconvenient for them. He paused for a moment, his gaze steady on the woman, unflinching. 2A, ma'am, he replied, showing his boarding pass calmly, deliberately, allowing the card to speak the authority he already carried. Around them, other passengers began to notice the tension. A businessman shifted in his seat, briefly lifting his laptop to peek over. A young mother guided her daughter closer. Phones tilted slightly, recording the unfolding scene. The subtle hum of whispers rippled through the cabin, a delicate anticipation settling like mist. Malik's mind wandered for just a fraction of a second, as it often did in these moments of confrontation. Should he assert himself immediately, risking a scene, or should he wait, letting the situation reveal itself, allowing discretion to become his instrument? He inhaled deeply, the scent of polished leather and the faint sweetness of early morning pastries grounding him. Patience had always been one of his greatest allies. The woman, noticing his lack of immediate retreat, tilted her head and smiled wider, a practiced charm meant to disarm. "Why don't you take 2C instead? You'll be more comfortable there." Her words dripped with a mix of mock sweetness and subtle dismissal, a message beneath the surface. "You do not belong here." Malik's chest tightened, a familiar feeling. The tension wasn't merely about a seat, it was about recognition, respect, and the unspoken weight of being judged before being acknowledged. He shifted his briefcase slightly, aligning himself to stand fully upright, as though anchoring himself in that small patch of space that, by law and logic, was unequivocally his. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The hum of the aircraft cabin, the murmur of passengers, the faint clicking of phone cameras all fell into a suspended rhythm. He could feel the subtle shift in energy, the anticipation building around this silent duel of presence and entitlement. In his mind, he acknowledged the truth he had faced countless situations like this, yet each one reminded him that authority was not always recognized until it revealed itself fully. He adjusted his jacket, letting the light play off the subtle texture of the fabric. His eyes scanned the woman again, calm, deliberate, and unwavering. "I'm not confused," he said softly but firmly. "This is my seat. It is clearly indicated on my boarding pass." The woman's smile faltered ever so slightly, but her posture remained unyielding. Around them, phones subtly shifted higher, cameras aimed surreptitiously. Malik's presence did not shout. It simply radiated, quiet and unshakable. Passengers felt it, the tension, the unspoken assertion of dignity. Here was a man who had carried not just a boarding pass, but years of experience navigating spaces where he was never expected to belong. And in that instant, the cabin itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Malik Jefferson stepped closer to the seat, eyes calm, breathing even. His hand rested briefly on the armrest, a simple gesture that carried weight far beyond its simplicity. This was not arrogance. It was awareness. It was authority tempered by patience, by the certainty that truth, when held steadily, demanded recognition. And so the stage was set, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with a presence so grounded, so deliberate, that the world around it seemed to pause in acknowledgement. Malik Jefferson took a measured step forward, keeping his gaze fixed on the woman occupying his seat. Vanessa Sterling didn't even look up from her phone. Her designer tote sprawled across the armrest, her legs crossed as if she had claimed the space as an extension of herself. She smiled, A practiced curve meant to disarm, charm, or intimidate depending on the audience. "This is my seat," Vanessa said again, her voice calm but tinged with condescension. "People like me always sit by the window." The words hit Malik with the subtle force of a cold wind, but outwardly he remained composed. He had encountered entitlement before, enough times to recognize it instantly. It wasn't about the seat. It was about recognition, or rather, the lack of it. He noticed a young couple nearby lean slightly forward, whispering to each other while pretending not to watch. Another man peeked from behind a laptop screen, curiosity and tension dancing in his eyes. Phones tilted, discreet cameras capturing every second. Malik lifted his hand slowly, revealing his boarding pass. 2A, ma'am, he said calmly, his tone carrying an understated authority. His words were soft but firm, almost gentle, yet weighted by certainty. He didn't shout, he didn't demand. The pass itself did the work. Vanessa's lips uncurled into a rehearsed smile, tilting her head slightly. "You must be confused," she said, barely glancing up. "Why don't you take 2C instead? You'll be more comfortable there." Her tone was soft, almost sweet, but the implication was sharp. "You do not belong here." Malik felt a familiar tension tightening in his chest, a recognition that he had been here before in countless spaces. Spaces where authority was invisible to those who refused to see it, where skin color, rather than competence, seemed to dictate respect. He adjusted his posture, aligning himself with the chair, letting his presence speak louder than words. Patience was his ally. Reaction would come later, measured and precise. Passengers around them began to notice the subtle skirmish. A businessman shifted in his seat, curiosity evident, while a mother tucked her daughter a little closer, sensing the unspoken tension. Phones tilted higher, screens lit with small glowing rectangles, recording. Malik's calmness contrasted sharply with the irritation emanating from Vanessa, and that contrast drew eyes and attention naturally. For a moment, he allowed himself a mental pause, reflecting on the countless times he had been underestimated, times when decisions were questioned, qualifications doubted, and presence ignored, all because the world had not yet recognized him. He reminded himself of the power of composure, of measured restraint, and of the subtle, undeniable authority that came from owning oneself completely. Vanessa noticed his pause and interpreted it incorrectly. She leaned back, lifting a hand in what she thought was a dismissive gesture. "Why don't you just sit down and relax? 2C isn't so far from 2A. You'll enjoy the window from there, eventually." Her smile widened slightly, practiced and cold. The words were laced with mockery, the type designed to unsettle. The cabin remained quiet, each passenger sensing the gravity behind a seemingly ordinary airline confrontation. Malik's mind swirled briefly with internal calculations. Should he escalate now, drawing attention, risking confrontation, or maintain this calm to ensure clarity of purpose? He felt a momentary flicker of frustration, a tight knot forming in his stomach, but it passed as he centered himself. He could feel the quiet weight of observation pressing from all sides. Passengers waiting for resolution, some rooting silently for the underdog, some perhaps curious, others skeptical. He spoke again, voice steady, careful yet deliberate. "I'm not confused. This is my seat. It is clearly printed on my boarding pass." His words were measured, deliberate, and yet carried a subtle force. the kind that invited recognition without demanding submission. Vanessa's smile faltered briefly, but her posture remained rigid. She didn't retreat, didn't yield. Around them, the cabin shifted. Whispers rose, low and indistinct at first, then gradually more audible. A young man 2 rows back angled his phone subtly, beginning to record. A woman adjusted her scarf, eyes wide. The energy in the room changed, an unspoken tension forming, pregnant with expectation. Malik remained calm, but internally. He reflected on the microaggressions, the subtle biases that had shadowed his life, each moment of dismissal, each glance that questioned his place, each assumption that he did not belong today. It would all meet the quiet, unwavering force of his presence. For years, he had learned that authority did not always need to be announced. It could be demonstrated through stillness, clarity, and an unshakable sense of self. Vanessa, sensing the attention, fondly looked up fully, her expression unreadable for a moment. She tilted her head, lips pressed lightly together. Her eyes flicked to Malik, then around the cabin, noticing the quiet attention of passengers. Something in her calculated charm shifted, an awareness that this interaction might not play out as she intended. Malik continued to stand, composed, allowing the weight of the moment to settle, to clarify itself. He knew that confrontation could be a delicate art, that each micro-gesture and measured pause could convey far more than forceful words. He had witnessed, and indeed orchestrated, countless negotiations, boardroom showdowns, and high-stakes decisions where quiet patience won, where bluster would have failed. For the passengers, the tension was palpable. Phones shifted higher. A mother whispered under her breath, "I think he deserves it." A man behind whispered, "Unbelievable." The cabin became a stage for more than a dispute over a seat. It became a silent commentary on entitlement, dignity, and authority. Malik inhaled slowly, allowing his mind to settle. The choice was simple, yet profound: stand quietly, assert authority without aggression, and let the truth of the boarding pass. His calm demeanor and the undeniable legitimacy of his presence command recognition. And so, he stood, composed, steady, letting the moment stretch just long enough to allow every observer to feel the gravity of the encounter. His hand rested lightly on the armrest, a subtle claim of presence. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture broadly. He simply stood, confident, assured, and unmovable in the knowledge that truth and authority, when held with calm certainty, demanded recognition. The cabin remained quiet, almost reverent, as if holding its collective breath. The energy had shifted from curiosity to cautious observation. Malik Jefferson's quiet authority now dominated the space, an invisible aura drawing attention, respect, and subtle tension all at once. This was more than a dispute over a seat. It was the first chapter of a confrontation that would grow to challenge entitlement, bias, and assumptions in the quietest, most compelling way possible. Malik Jefferson adjusted his briefcase slightly, the leather strap sliding comfortably over his shoulder. He allowed himself a measured breath, letting the moment stretch just enough for clarity. He could feel Vanessa Sterling's gaze finally lift to meet his, sharp and calculated, yet betraying the slightest flicker of uncertainty. She did not yet know who she was dealing with, and he was determined to let that remain a question for the moment. "I'm not confused," Malik said, voice soft but unwavering. "This is my seat. It is clearly indicated on my boarding pass." Vanessa tilted her head, lips pressed together in a forced smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with patronizing charm. "Why make a fuss? Take 2C. You'll be just as comfortable there." Her words carried more than suggestion, they carried entitlement. It was a subtle dismissal, a claim that she was not only right about the seat, but that her world, her expectations, mattered more than his. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. A young man from the back row tilted his phone to record, while a mother whispered something softly to her child, eyes wide. Every movement, every word seemed amplified in the quiet of the first-class section. Malik's mind flickered briefly to the countless times he had faced these situations. Meetings where his ideas were overlooked, introductions where his authority was questioned before even being acknowledged, and social spaces where presence alone was questioned because of skin color. He had learned patience, but this time, the stakes felt heavier. It wasn't just about him, it was about what the cabin, the passengers, the world would witness. He shifted his weight slightly, the movement deliberate, anchoring himself to the floor. His hand rested lightly on the armrest. Steady, visible, but unthreatening. It was a quiet assertion, a physical statement of presence. Words could escalate, but composure could dominate without raising a voice. Vanessa's eyes flicked to the passengers nearby, sensing their subtle attention. Phones tilted higher, small rectangles glowing as screens captured every second. A subtle ripple passed through the cabin, quiet murmurs of curiosity, whispered speculations. She tried to maintain control, smoothing her expression, but the tension was already beyond her reach. "Take 2C, she repeated, louder this time. "It's closer to the aisle. You'll be more comfortable there. Trust me." Malik shook his head slightly, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. "Why should I move?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the soft hum of whispers and rolling luggage behind them. "I am the rightful occupant of 2A. The seat belongs to me." The cabin responded almost instantly. A soft murmur rose among the passengers, more audible this time. A man in the row behind leaned forward slightly, muttering under his breath. Another passenger, a woman adjusting her scarf, nodded subtly. Phones tilted, lights glinting as recording continued. The energy shifted, a silent chorus acknowledging the injustice. Vanessa's lips pressed tighter together, and for the first time, the carefully constructed mask of calm began to crack. Her hand brushed over her tote bag as if claiming it more firmly. Yet even this small movement betrayed a hint of agitation. She glanced briefly at Malik, trying to read his intent, but he remained unreadable, composed, unwavering. Inside Malik, a different tension simmered. He could feel the familiar swell of frustration, a quiet storm threatening to rise. Yet he reminded himself why he had learned patience, why he had cultivated control. Reacting with anger would diminish his authority. Remaining calm would amplify it. He weighed the moment carefully, the passengers, the cameras, the subtle hum of observation around him. Each second, he felt, was an opportunity to assert truth without aggression. Vanessa, realizing she was losing the silent battle of presence, leaned slightly forward, attempting to inject authority into her voice. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked. The question intended to intimidate, to remind him of her status in her own world, her assumed dominance. Malik's eyes held hers, calm, steady, and unflinching. For a heartbeat, he did not speak. He let the words linger, carrying the weight of restraint. "Not yet," he said softly, "but you will find out soon enough." The murmur among the passengers grew louder, subtle but undeniable. Phones lifted, recording, streaming, sharing. The young man from earlier angled his device, capturing every flicker of tension. The mother, holding her child, whispered, almost audibly, "Now it's not right. He belongs there." Malik felt a quiet satisfaction not from conflict, but from the clarity of truth. He could sense the energy in the cabin beginning to shift. The confrontation was no longer about a seat. It had become about recognition, dignity, and the subtle assertion of presence against entitlement. Vanessa shifted in her seat, attempting a final charm offensive, her smile strained. "People like me, we always know our place," she said, words dripping with condescension. "You'll be happier over there. Trust me." Malik's gaze did not waver. "Respect matters more than convenience," he said quietly, allowing the sentence to resonate. It was simple, yet profound. And in the quiet of the cabin, the weight of his words landed. A woman nearby nodded subtly. Another passenger whispered agreement. Phones continued to tilt, live streams quietly capturing every nuance. The cabin seemed suspended in a delicate balance, the tension almost tangible. Every passenger felt it, the quiet power, the subtle authority, the clash of entitlement and rightful presence. Malik's composure was not empty. It was anchored in decades of experience, in resilience shaped by repeated challenges, in the certainty that presence and truth, when held firmly, demanded acknowledgement. For a moment, Malik allowed his mind a brief reflection. He had endured countless assumptions, countless dismissals, countless judgments based on appearances rather than merit. But this moment, unlike many before, was public, recorded, observable. It was an opportunity not just for himself, but for the countless others who had been underestimated or overlooked, for the passengers who recognized injustice quietly but felt powerless to act. He adjusted his stance slightly, subtly reinforcing the unspoken message he was here. He belonged, and he would not yield. Vanessa, sensing the growing awareness around her, shifted uneasily, her composure faltering ever so slightly. The balance of power in the cabin had begun to tilt, imperceptibly at first, yet unmistakably toward Malik Jefferson. The confrontation had only just begun, yet already it had transformed from a dispute over a seat into a subtle lesson in authority, dignity, and presence. Malik knew that the coming minutes would demand patience, clarity, and unwavering composure, and he was prepared to meet it with the quiet, measured strength that had always guided him. The quiet tension that had settled over row 2 stretched, almost tangible. When Samantha Green, the lead flight attendant, appeared at the aisle, her uniform crisp, hair neatly pinned, clipboard in hand. She moved with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to diffusing situations. Yet even in her measured steps, a subtle bias crept into her demeanor. She glanced first at Vanessa Sterling, whose calm had been slightly strained, then at Malik Jefferson, standing resolute by his rightful seat. "Gentlemen, ladies," Samantha began, her voice polite yet firm. "Let's resolve this quickly." She shifted her gaze to Malik. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in 2C. Malik's brow lifted slightly, a small but deliberate gesture of incredulity. "Why should I move?" he asked softly. "This is my seat. My boarding pass clearly indicates 2A. Samantha paused, pen hovering over her clipboard. She exchanged a subtle glance with Vanessa, as if seeking confirmation of which way to lean. The cabin's energy rippled, passengers leaning forward just slightly, sensing that the moment was larger than it appeared. Phones tilted, discreetly capturing the scene. Vanessa's lips curled into a faint smirk. "See, even the flight attendant suggests it. You'll be happier over there. Trust me." Malik's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Internally, a swirl of frustration pressed against his calm exterior. He had navigated countless spaces where authority was ignored, dismissed, or underestimated because of the color of his skin. He had faced moments like this countless times, moments where the subtle enforcement of bias disguised itself as customer service. Yet he held his composure. Raising his voice, showing anger, would only give Vanessa the satisfaction of a reaction. Authority, he reminded himself, was often quieter than confrontation. The cabin remained aware, hushed but attentive. A woman seated nearby whispered to her husband, "It's unbelievable. He's right." Her phone tilted slightly. Recording. Another passenger shifted, nudging the person next to them, murmuring a quiet agreement. The subtle chorus of acknowledgement, a collective awareness, pressed upon Vanessa without words. Samantha Green, sensing the growing tension, attempted to regain control. "Sir, I understand your concern," she said, her tone polite, almost conciliatory, "but sometimes, for the comfort of everyone, it's easier to adjust seating. 2C is available. You would be just as comfortable there." Malik's eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. He felt a familiar knot of tension in his chest, the desire to assert fairness against the instinct to maintain peace. "I'm not adjusting," he said calmly. "I'm in the seat I paid for. That is 2A. Respect matters more than convenience." His voice carried a gentle authority that belied the weight of the statement. For a moment, Samantha hesitated, pen poised over her clipboard. Her training urged de-escalation, but the ethical weight pressed in subtly. Could she enforce fairness, or would she default to appeasing the passenger who presented the loudest sense of entitlement? Vanessa's gaze flicked to Malik, then around the cabin, calculating, measuring the reactions of the people recording, watching, and whispering. A low hum of murmurs threaded through the cabin. Phones recorded every second, live comments scrolling across glowing screens. The young man from earlier, seated 2 rows back, whispered under his breath, "She's got no right to do this." He's standing firm. The mother, still holding her child close, nodded, eyes wide with quiet admiration. Malik's mind raced briefly, reflecting on the decades of subtle bias he had faced. Each assumption, each judgment that ignored his presence had built a reservoir of patience, tempered by experience. Yet this situation carried something more. It was public, recorded, witnessed by strangers who might never see him again, but who could understand the injustice. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, not just for himself, but for all who had ever been told, subtly or openly, that they did not belong. Vanessa, growing impatient, leaned slightly forward. "Sir, you don't want to make this difficult, do you? We can resolve this quietly." Her tone, soft as it was, carried a subtle threat resistance would bring inconvenience. Malik's gaze remained calm, steady, unyielding. "It is not I who's making it difficult," he replied. "It is those who refuse to acknowledge fairness and truth." The murmurs in the cabin grew slightly louder. Phones tilted higher. A few passengers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The subtle balance of authority had shifted. Malik's quiet confidence now dominated the space, challenging Vanessa's entitlement without a single raised voice. Samantha, realizing that her intervention had failed to resolve the conflict in the expected manner, took a measured step back. Her pen hovered, indecision flickering across her face. She had been trained to prevent escalation, yet she recognized, for the first time perhaps, that deference to entitlement could itself be a moral compromise. The cabin held its collective breath, each passenger silently noting the tension between protocol and justice. Malik felt a faint tightening in his chest as he considered the implications. Every word, every movement was now recorded, observed, and interpreted. He reflected briefly on the irony authority, so often invisible to those who assumed power based on privilege, was now visible through restraint, composure, and truth. He allowed himself a subtle inward acknowledgement of the control he maintained, aware that escalation would come later, but only on his terms. Vanessa, sensing the subtle shift in power, straightened her posture. Her practiced composure showed cracks as the cabin's attention began to align with Malik's quiet authority. She adjusted her tote, pressed her lips, but did not move. The space around 2A had become a stage, and every observer a witness, a participant, or both was taking note. For Malik, the moment was more than a confrontation over a seat. It was a quiet test of presence, dignity, and authority. He had learned that sometimes the loudest statements were not spoken, but felt. He remained poised, aware of each movement, each breath, each subtle observation. This confrontation had only just begun, and already it was teaching lessons about entitlement, respect, and the weight of ethical authority. The cabin, now charged with anticipation, waited for the next movement, the next word, the next assertion. Phones tilted, whispers circulated, the hum of awareness palpable. Malik Jefferson remained, as always, calm, measured, and ready. The true test had not yet arrived. But the stage was perfectly set. The cabin had grown quietly tense, the hum of conversation dimming as passengers subconsciously leaned toward the unfolding confrontation. Malik Jefferson stood with a calm assurance, his presence commanding without a single raised voice. Vanessa Sterling's smile, carefully curated for so many years, began to falter as she realized the subtle shift in the energy around her. She cleared her throat, her voice rising slightly. "People like you shouldn't argue," Vanessa said, her words sharp, dripping with condescension. "I'll just sit down elsewhere. You'll be more comfortable there." The words landed like a punch to the gut for anyone paying attention. It was not just a suggestion. It was a statement of exclusion, a declaration of entitlement wrapped in the guise of civility. The murmurs of passengers rose subtly at first, but soon the quiet awareness began to swell. Phones tilted, cameras turned, and a young journalist standing nearby. Jessica Alvarez unclipped her press badge and stepped forward. "This is racial discrimination happening right now," Jessica announced, her voice steady, yet infused with urgency. She raised her phone, streaming the moment live. The soft glow of recording screens flickered across the cabin, capturing every micro-expression, every tense gesture, every pause. Within seconds, whispers spread as passengers began to share the live feed. The quiet hum of the cabin had become an invisible chorus of witnesses. Malik felt the tension inside him, familiar and sharp. He had encountered countless situations where microaggressions went unnoticed, where subtle bias went unchallenged. Here, in the confined space of first class, with witnesses recording, the stakes were different. Every movement, every word mattered, and yet he remained calm, his mind measuring, calculating the most effective way to assert dignity and authority without inflaming the situation unnecessarily. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Malik, then around the cabin, realizing that her words were no longer private, no longer just a small act of entitlement. They were being observed, documented, interpreted. She attempted to regain control. "You people are blowing this out of proportion," she said, her tone sharpening, defensive now. "It's just a seat. Really." But the energy had shifted too far. Phones rose higher, comments scrolled rapidly across live feeds. The passengers closest to the row began whispering their agreement with Malik's position. A man muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." How can she say that another passenger nodded toward the phone, murmuring, "Clip this. People need to see this." Malik's internal dialogue remained quiet but intense. He recognized the subtle fear, the discomfort, the social conditioning that had informed Vanessa's behavior. And he recognized the opportunity to stand, to demonstrate that authority and dignity were not negotiable, and to make the moment teachable without anger, without retaliation. He inhaled slowly, allowing the awareness of the passengers, the glow of phones, the ripple of whispers to settle around him. Vanessa's composure continued to crack. Her hands tightened slightly on her tote, her shoulders rising and falling as though drawing strength from the bag itself. Her voice wavered slightly. "I've been flying this airline for over 15 years, she said. "I know how things work. You'll be happier if you just move." Malik's gaze remained unwavering. "Happiness is not the point," he said quietly, measured. "Respect matters more than convenience." His voice carried calm authority, almost melodic in its steadiness. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively, passengers nodding subtly, some muttering agreement, others holding phones, recording every syllable. Jessica Alvarez, live streaming from the aisle, felt the gravity of the moment. Comments began flooding in. "This is unbelievable. Classic discrimination." Finally, someone standing up. Within seconds, what had been a private confrontation had become a public lesson in entitlement, fairness, and respect. The cabin's energy, once dominated by tension and uncertainty, shifted to a shared awareness of injustice. Malik reflected briefly on the subtle, internal conflicts that had shaped him. Every encounter like this, every assumption, every microaggression had demanded restraint, strategy, and clarity of purpose. He could feel the swell of awareness in the cabin as passengers and technology alike became instruments of observation and, ultimately, accountability. Vanessa leaned back slightly, trying to regain composure, yet the cracks were visible. Her practiced charm, once her shield, now seemed insufficient. Malik's quiet strength, his unwavering calm, and the collective witness of passengers had shifted the balance of power. For the first time, her entitlement met a force it could not easily overcome. The murmurs grew louder, and a passenger whispered to another, "He's right. He should be in that seat." The cabin was no longer a passive space, it had become a stage. And the actors were not just Malik and Vanessa, they were everyone present, each phone and each eye a silent participant. Malik felt a subtle nod of satisfaction, not from victory, but from the clarity of the moment. This was not a personal battle. It was a demonstration of principle, a living example of authority exercised with dignity, patience, and the quiet assertion of rightful presence. The energy in the cabin crackled softly, a silent anticipation hanging over every observer. Malik Jefferson stood tall, every inch composed, every gesture measured, eyes steady on Vanessa Sterling, demonstrating with absolute clarity that respect was not negotiable, that dignity was inherent, and that truth could not be denied by entitlement. Vanessa's lips pressed together in frustration. She could feel the quiet opposition of the passengers, the subtle power of recorded observation, and the moral weight now pressing upon her. The confrontation had escalated beyond the simple matter of a seat. It had become a reflection of societal assumptions, biases, and the quiet strength of those who refused to yield. For Malik, the moment was also intensely personal. Every whisper, every recording, every small acknowledgement by a passenger reinforced what he had known for years. Authority and dignity required patience, observation, and the courage to stand when no one else would. He inhaled once more, letting the stillness settle, feeling the quiet swell of justice forming around him, though unspoken, uncelebrated yet undeniable. This was the turning point, the moment when the mundane, a simple seat became a catalyst for awareness, reflection, and, ultimately, the assertion of respect that could not be ignored. Malik Jefferson remained calm, composed, and utterly unmovable, allowing the cabin, the passengers, and the world to witness a lesson in authority, patience, and the quiet power of standing one's ground. The subtle tension in the cabin thickened further as the overhead lights reflected off polished chrome and leather seats. Malik Jefferson remained calm, standing next to 2A, but his inner mind was alert, calculating, aware of the audience that had grown with every passing second. The murmurs, the flashes of phone screens, the small nods of approval all contributed to a growing sense of collective attention. A few feet away, the soft thud of polished shoes announced the presence of Captain Thomas Reed. The silver-haired pilot, with an authoritative presence shaped by years of command, approached the scene, clipboard in hand. He scanned the row, first glancing at Vanessa Sterling, then briefly at Malik. The captain's brow furrowed slightly as he assessed the situation, weighing what action to take. "Ladies, gentlemen," Captain Reed began, his voice firm but not harsh, carrying the weight of authority. "May I see your boarding passes?" Malik reached into his pocket and produced the neatly folded pass for 2A. He handed it over slowly, deliberately, allowing the action itself to reinforce his claim. Vanessa hesitated, her fingers brushing the leather of her tote as if to steady herself, then produced her boarding pass, showing 2C. The captain's eyes flicked between the two, processing, and for a moment it seemed he was caught in the tension between protocol and immediate social pressure. "Sometimes," Captain Reed began cautiously, "we ask one passenger to move to maintain cabin harmony." His gaze lingered on Malik. "Sir, would you be willing to take another seat?" Malik's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Inside, a storm of frustration flickered. This was the same bias, the same subtle dismissal that had colored countless experiences in his life. He had spent decades navigating spaces where authority and dignity were often invisible to those who presumed entitlement, and yet outwardly he remained perfectly composed. "The rightful passenger should not yield," he said softly, each word deliberate. The one who refuses to respect the boarding pass should not be rewarded. Vanessa's lips pressed together, a flicker of irritation passing through her composed facade. The cabin began to hum with awareness again, passengers leaning slightly, whispering to each other. Phones rose, screens glowing, live streams capturing every nuanced gesture, every subtle inflection in tone. Malik noticed the energy-shifting momentum was building around principle, dignity, and quiet authority. Captain Reed adjusted his stance, clearly weighing the implications of enforcing protocol versus allowing the subtle social tension to continue. Malik could sense the hesitation, the internal conflict. The captain had been trained to prevent escalation, but he had also been trained to maintain order. The invisible line between fairness and practicality now stretched taut across the cabin. Malik felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten slightly. He reflected briefly on the countless times he had seen rules bent to favor those who assumed entitlement. Times when authority had been ignored because it belonged to someone who didn't fit the expected mold. Yet he did not act on impulse. He breathed deeply, letting the stillness become a weapon. Calm was often more powerful than confrontation. Vanessa, realizing the captain was not immediately supporting her, leaned slightly forward, attempting to assert control. "Captain, surely this is unnecessary," she said, her tone slipping from confident to mildly urgent. "He can simply take 2C. It will prevent disruption." Malik's eyes, calm and unwavering, met hers. "Disruption?" he asked softly. "Disruption is caused by refusing to acknowledge what is right." The words were quiet, measured, but carried weight. The cabin seemed to respond collectively, the subtle acknowledgement of passengers rippling through like a wave. Jessica Alvarez, still recording from her position, whispered to herself, "This is bigger than a seat. This is about fairness." Her phone captured every second, the words, the gestures, and the unspoken tension that hung in the air. Comments on her live stream began to accumulate rapidly. "He's calm, but he's making a statement." Finally, someone standing their ground. The nerve of some people thinking entitlement wins. Malik's internal dialogue flickered briefly with consideration. He could feel the eyes of every passenger, the glow of countless screens, the subtle judgments and support flowing in equal measure. Every movement mattered. Every word carried weight. He knew this was no longer just about the seat. It was about authority, dignity, and the quiet demonstration of principle in real time. Vanessa's smile faltered completely now. Her carefully maintained composure was showing cracks, and Malik noticed the shift in power, subtle yet undeniable, had begun to manifest. Her grip on her tote tightened, her posture stiffened, but her voice was losing the confident ease she had relied upon. Captain Reed cleared his throat, glancing at Malik once more. Malik remained composed, unflinching, allowing the captain to process, to weigh, to observe. Malik's presence itself was a silent assertion of legitimacy. No raising of the voice, no dramatic gesture. Yet the authority he embodied was impossible to ignore. The passengers, sensing the critical moment, adjusted in their seats. Phones tilted. Whispers passed quietly between them. Even those who had initially remained passive were now engaged, their attention focused on the subtle dynamics unfolding. The cabin had become a microcosm of justice, observation, and the tension between perceived power and rightful authority. Malik's internal reflection continued, brief and precise. He considered the ethical weight of the situation, the responsibility of standing firm while maintaining composure, the quiet teaching moment it had become. This was not just for him, it was for every observer, every silent witness, every person who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that their presence and rights were negotiable. The captain's eyes lingered, hesitation clear in his posture. Malik understood the moment fully. Patience, clarity, and quiet resolve were his tools. He could see that the balance of authority was about to shift further, and the culmination of this quiet struggle was approaching. The cabin remained suspended in anticipation. Phones glowed, murmurs flowed, and the subtle acknowledgement of rightness and dignity began to permeate the space. Malik Jefferson stood tall, composed, and utterly unmovable, a beacon of calm authority amidst entitlement, subtle bias, and social pressure. This confrontation had evolved beyond a dispute over a seat. It had become a silent but powerful lesson in fairness, authority, and the quiet assertion of dignity. And all eyes were now on him, waiting for the next move, the next word, the next assertion of principle. Vanessa Sterling's composure finally cracked, her carefully rehearsed charm, the same charm that had carried her through countless first-class experiences, was slipping. Her eyes darted around the cabin, noting the phones tilted in her direction, the subtle murmurs, the quick glances of passengers recording or streaming the unfolding scene. Her lips pressed together in tension. "This is ridiculous," she said, louder now. Her voice carried through the cabin, sharp and accusatory. "You people are blowing this out of proportion. It's just a seat." Her words, however, had the opposite effect. They amplified the tension rather than diffusing it. Passengers' heads turned, whispers rippling through the cabin. Some leaned toward the aisle to better see what was happening. Phones, already recording, now tilted higher as observers documented the confrontation. The live feed captured every syllable, every flicker of emotion. Jessica Alvarez's voice was calm but urgent, narrating what she saw to her online audience. "This is blatant discrimination," she said softly, ensuring the camera caught Vanessa's posture, her fleeting smirk, her patronizing tone. Comments began flooding the stream. Finally, someone standing their ground. "Disgraceful behavior. This needs to be seen." Malik Jefferson remained calm, his posture steady, but internally, he felt the pressure mounting. He was aware of the thousands, possibly millions, who would soon see this footage online. Every breath, every subtle movement, every measured word was now magnified beyond the walls of the plane. Yet his mind remained deliberate. Patience and composure had always been his tools, and he would wield them here with the same precision. Vanessa, sensing the tide turning, tried to reinforce her authority. "I've been flying this airline for over 15 years, she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I know how things work. Surely you don't want to make this difficult, do you?" Malik's eyes held hers, unwavering. "Difficulty is created by ignoring what is right," he replied quietly but firmly. His voice did not rise, but its calm authority carried through the cabin like a silent command. Passengers leaned in subconsciously, phones raised, some whispering to each other. "He's right. This isn't just about a seat." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. A young mother adjusted her daughter's scarf, eyes wide, nodding subtly. A businessman across the aisle whispered to his colleague, "Unbelievable. How could someone act like that?" The cabin was no longer passive. It had become a collective witness, engaged and alert, each individual participant in the growing awareness of injustice. Vanessa's face flushed, her earlier confidence faltering as she realized the power of the situation had shifted away from her. Malik's quiet composure, combined with the attention of passengers and the documentation through phones and live streams, had transformed the confrontation. It was no longer about a seat. It had become a public lesson in authority, dignity, and social accountability. Malik, aware of the growing momentum, allowed himself a subtle internal reflection. He thought of the countless times entitlement had overshadowed fairness, the innumerable microaggressions, and the systemic bias that had shaped experiences across industries, social settings, and public spaces. This was a moment to demonstrate that dignity and authority could prevail quietly but powerfully, even in the face of overt privilege. Vanessa attempted one last verbal maneuver, her voice slightly higher, edged with desperation. "Look around, darling. People like me always sit here. People like you, well, you'll be more comfortable elsewhere." Her words dripped with condescension, and the cabin reacted immediately. Gasps echoed softly, whispers intensified. Phones rose higher, capturing the audacity of her statement, the visible tension in her posture, and Malik's unwavering calm. Malik's chest tightened momentarily, an emotional flicker of anger and disappointment passing through him. He reminded himself to remain composed. Anger could escalate the situation unnecessarily. Patience, clarity, and dignity would ensure both authority and justice were acknowledged. He exhaled slowly, letting the stillness carry weight in the cabin. Jessica Alvarez narrated calmly into her phone, capturing every nuance. Notice how the passenger remains calm while being subjected to outright discrimination. This is the reality of entitlement versus rightful presence. Comments poured in. He's showing everyone how to respond. The courage to stay calm is incredible. This is going to go viral. Passengers, now fully engaged, whispered and nodded. Some raised their eyebrows, others shook their heads, incredulous at Vanessa's audacity. The cabin had collectively shifted from curiosity to moral alignment. Malik's quiet authority now dominated, Vanessa's confidence eroding with every moment of witness and observation. Vanessa's voice faltered again. She glanced at Captain Thomas Reed, perhaps expecting intervention or support. The captain's eyes met hers briefly, expression neutral but thoughtful. Malik, reading the subtle hesitation, maintained his calm stance, understanding that the momentum of public observation was now an ally. The murmur of passengers escalated to a soft chorus of acknowledgement. A man whispered, "He deserves that seat. Period." Another added, "It's insane. She thinks she can say that." The energy in the cabin was no longer localized. It had taken on a quiet, yet undeniable force. The power of collective witness amplifying Malik's authority without a single raised voice. Vanessa's hands clenched lightly on her tote, her lips pressed together, shoulders stiffening. She could feel the subtle social pressure of the passengers, the scrutiny of live stream viewers, and the ethical weight pressing down on her. Her entitlement, once assumed absolute, was now confronted by truth, authority, and public accountability. Malik exhaled softly, allowing a pause, letting the space settle. The cabin was alive with quiet electricity, the tension suspended yet thick with the moral gravity of the moment. Every passenger, phone, and whisper had contributed to the rising awareness, and Malik's patience had ensured that his authority was undeniable without aggression. In that suspended space, Malik's reflection deepened. He thought of all those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed due to appearances or social bias. The quiet power of standing firm, of asserting truth with dignity, could ripple far beyond this cabin, influencing perceptions, inspiring action, and reinforcing that respect was not optional. Vanessa finally realized that her attempt to assert entitlement was failing. The cabin, the passengers, and even the live audience were aligned with Malik's quiet authority. Her practiced charm, once her shield, now seemed fragile against the tide of moral clarity and collective observation. The stage was set for the coming revelations. The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple matter of seating. The cabin, alive with the tension and the subtle moral pressure of witnesses, had transformed into a crucible of fairness, dignity, and authority. Malik Jefferson remained composed, calm, and resolute, the embodiment of quiet power and ethical clarity. The cabin had reached a fragile equilibrium. Malik Jefferson stood calm, steady, and unyielding, the silent authority he embodied resonating through every glance, every tilt of a phone, every whisper among the passengers. Vanessa Sterling's composure was fraying. Her repeated assertions of entitlement no longer commanded the respect she expected. Every murmur, every recording, every subtle acknowledgement of Malik's presence was tipping the scales. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, the movement deliberate, unhurried. With one smooth motion, he pulled out his phone and opened a secure application, an encrypted interface that few in the cabin could understand, but that carried undeniable weight. The small device glowed softly, reflecting on his calm, focused eyes. The screen displayed the executive override credentials of the airline. Malik's lips pressed together slightly, a brief micro-expression of control and quiet anticipation. The murmurs of the cabin continued, whispering into the spaces between the murmurs. Curiosity blended with incredulity. Vanessa's eyes flicked to the device in his hand, suspicion and fear beginning to mingle with her arrogance. Her hands tightened slightly on her tote. Malik's fingers moved deliberately over the screen. He accessed the corporate override, the command authority vested only in the chairman and majority shareholder. With a measured tap, the cabin's communication system signaled a corporate alert. The radio crackled faintly above, drawing the attention of Captain Thomas Reed. "Return to gate. Corporate order issued," came the voice through the cabin intercom, formal, unmistakable. The words hung in the air, a quiet explosion of authority. Passengers shifted, their heads turning in disbelief, phones tilted higher, live streams capturing every flicker of expression. The murmurs grew into audible gasps. Vanessa's face drained of color. Her previously confident smirk had vanished completely. I didn't know who you were," she stammered, her voice faltering. The tote that had served as a shield now seemed to weigh heavily in her grasp. She glanced at Captain Reed, hoping for some intervention, but his eyes were steady, calculating, acknowledging the unmistakable weight of corporate authority. Malik's voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the sudden tension. "That's the problem," he said softly, measured, deliberate. "You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to respect my boarding pass." The words resonated with finality. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively, the subtle energy now coalescing into a wave of acknowledgement, support, and moral clarity. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring softly, some applauding quietly, others still holding phones to record every nuance. The cabin, once a silent witness to tension and entitlement, had become a stage of accountability. Malik's quiet authority had transformed the confrontation into a demonstration of principle, patience, and ethical clarity. Vanessa's shoulders slumped slightly, her attempt at dominance eroded by the weight of observation, corporate authority, and the undeniable truth of Malik's claim. She opened her mouth to protest again, but the words faltered, caught between disbelief and the realization of the growing consequences. Every passenger could feel it. The social and moral shift had turned decisively against her. Malik allowed a subtle, almost imperceptible pause, letting the cabin absorb the impact of his presence and the revelation of his power. Every whisper, every tilted phone, every quiet gasp was a confirmation the rightful authority had been revealed, and entitlement without merit could not withstand it. Captain Thomas Reed, still observing, stepped back slightly, acknowledging the command. His authority as captain remained, but in that moment, corporate and moral authority had eclipsed procedural hierarchy. The subtle interplay of power, observation, and patience became palpable to every passenger present. Jessica Alvarez, capturing every moment on her live stream, whispered to her audience, "He's not just standing his ground, he owns the airline. Watch how composure, patience, and authority shift the entire cabin." Comments flooded in instantaneously. Power with dignity. Finally, someone showing how to respond. This is incredible. Within moments, the footage began to trend across social media platforms, sharing the quiet yet undeniable power of Malik's actions. Malik allowed himself a brief inward acknowledgement, a flicker of satisfaction that was not born of triumph over Vanessa, but from the clarity and fairness now observable in the cabin. His presence, patience, and quiet authority had not only addressed entitlement, but had elevated a simple boarding dispute into a lesson in dignity, fairness, and moral courage. Vanessa, pale and visibly shaken, grasped her tote tighter. Her eyes darted to the cameras, realizing that every gesture, every word had been recorded, documented, and observed by countless witnesses beyond the cabin. The social ramifications were instant and inescapable. Her confidence, once so assured, had evaporated in the face of public and moral accountability. Malik remained calm, his mind sharp, considering each potential reaction, each subtle escalation. Yet outwardly, he did nothing aggressive or loud. His stillness and measured demeanor carried more weight than any shout or gesture could. Every passenger, every recording device, every whisper now reinforced the lesson authority, dignity, and truth were inseparable. A few passengers quietly clapped, a sound that resonated softly through the cabin. Others nodded, murmuring their agreement, their acknowledgement of justice silently rendered. Phones tilted higher, capturing the ripple effect as passengers began to recognize the broader implications. This was more than a seat. It was an assertion of principle, a teaching moment for everyone present and for those who would watch later. Malik allowed a small, private smile to touch the corners of his lips, imperceptible to Vanessa but unmistakable to himself. He had not raised his voice. He had not gestured dramatically. He had done nothing but stand firm, exercise patience, and reveal the truth of his authority at the precise moment. The cabin, the passengers, The live audience, everyone had witnessed the quiet unraveling of entitlement confronted by integrity. Vanessa's lips pressed together, her previously poised demeanor shattered. Every instinct for dominance faltered under the weight of Malik's calm power, the observation of the passengers, and the undeniable authority now confirmed. Her privilege, so long assumed to be unassailable, was now publicly revealed as fragile and hollow. Malik's voice broke the near silence once more, soft yet unyielding. Let this be a reminder. Respect isn't optional. It is not determined by appearance, confidence, or assumed entitlement. It is earned through recognition, fairness, and acknowledgement. The cabin seemed to exhale, a subtle, collective acknowledgement of the moral clarity now reigning. The moment had shifted. What had begun as a simple dispute over a seat had transformed into a demonstration of authority, patience, and social accountability. Malik Jefferson's quiet revelation of power had not only reasserted his rightful place, but had sent a ripple through the cabin, across the live stream, and into the wider world waiting online. Passengers watched, recording, murmuring, and nodding. Vanessa Sterling's world, once so controlled and assured, was now under scrutiny. The cabin, a microcosm of observation, justice, and public awareness, had become a testament to the power of patience, dignity, and moral clarity. Malik Jefferson remained calm, composed, and resolute, embodying a lesson far greater than any single confrontation could convey. Vanessa Sterling's face was as pale as the polished cabin walls. Her designer tote, once an extension of her assumed power, now felt like a leaden weight in her grasp. Every whisper, every tilted phone, every gaze of the passengers reminded her of the reality she could no longer deny. Malik Jefferson, calm, composed, and fully aware of the audience that surrounded him, allowed the silence to carry its weight. He lowered his phone, closing the secure app, yet the presence of authority lingered, palpable, undeniable. Every passenger felt it, the quiet power of dignity, patience, and truth. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively, the tension oscillating between disbelief and a deep, subtle acknowledgement of justice. "I didn't know who you were," Vanessa stammered, her voice trembling. The words lacked conviction, almost a plea. She glanced around at the other passengers, at the faint smiles and nods, at the phones capturing every expression. Her carefully curated aura of entitlement had collapsed in a single moment, exposed to scrutiny and the unflinching reality of observation. Malik's eyes held hers, unwavering, but his voice remained soft, deliberate, and controlled. "That's the problem," he said, each word deliberate, measured, and resonant. "You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to respect my boarding pass." The cabin erupted not with shouts, but with a quiet, deliberate applause. Phones tilted higher, capturing the scene, while live-stream comments flooded in. Justice served. Power with patience. Finally, someone showing the right way to respond. Every observer, seated or recording remotely, bore witness to the moment when calm authority met entitlement and dismantled it without rage, without spectacle, only with unshakable truth. Vanessa's hands tightened on her tote. She looked to Captain Thomas Reed for support, but his eyes were steady, neutral, acknowledging that the rightful authority now dominated the situation. The lead flight attendant, Samantha Green, stood frozen, realizing the implications of her earlier bias. her initial inclination to appease now highlighted as a moral misstep. Malik allowed a subtle, inward smile to touch his lips, imperceptible to most, but a private acknowledgment of the moment's clarity. He had stood firm, exercised patience, and allowed the truth of authority to speak without escalation, and it had done so powerfully. The ripple effect of this quiet dignity now moved through the cabin like a gentle wave, washing over the passengers, inspiring recognition and, in many, admiration. Vanessa attempted once more to regain some semblance of control, her voice trembling. "This attention. This will ruin you too. Important people won't side with you." Malik's voice, calm yet piercing, cut through her faltering assertion. "It isn't me this attention is ruining," he said softly. "It is the entitlement that refused to acknowledge fairness." The cabin absorbed the statement, the clarity resonating in the hushed acknowledgement of the passengers. Soft applause continued, murmurs rippling between the rows. Phones recorded, live streams continued, and the quiet hum of recognition grew louder. The moment had shifted from personal confrontation to collective acknowledgement of principle. Justice was not performed with anger or spectacle. It had been realized through calm authority, integrity, and unwavering adherence to what was right. The reactions of the passengers deepened the sense of resolution. A mother whispered to her daughter, "See, stand firm. Respect matters." The young man recording the scene nodded subtly, eyes wide with quiet admiration. Another passenger murmured, "He did it with patience. That's what makes it powerful." Each observer, whether engaged actively or silently, felt the weight of dignity, the reinforcement of principle, and the clarity of truth. Vanessa's composure had completely dissolved. Her eyes darted toward the cabin windows, the aisle, the overhead compartments anywhere but facing Malik's unwavering gaze. Every instinct for dominance had failed. The entitlement that had guided her behavior now appeared fragile, hollow, and entirely ineffective in the presence of authentic authority. Malik allowed himself a brief pause, exhaling softly, letting the cabin absorb the moment fully. The lesson was clear authority, dignity, and fairness could be exercised quietly but with power that no display of privilege could overturn. The subtle orchestration of patience, observation, and moral clarity had dismantled entitlement completely. Jessica Alvarez, documenting every second, whispered into her phone, her voice calm but full of awe. "Notice the patience, notice the composure. He's teaching everyone in this cabin and everyone online that dignity is unshakable." The comments on the live stream skyrocketed. Finally, someone standing for fairness. This is how real authority works. I hope everyone sees this. Passengers nodded, murmuring quietly among themselves, some allowing small smiles to appear. Malik Jefferson remained composed, seated briefly now in 2A, the rightful place, his posture upright, regal in its subtlety. There was no triumph in his demeanor, no gloating, no arrogance, but a quiet satisfaction in principle upheld and authority recognized. Vanessa's shoulders slumped entirely. The realization of her social and moral misstep weighed heavily. Her designer tote, once a shield of confidence and entitlement, now seemed entirely irrelevant, a symbol of her failed attempt to assert dominance over fairness. The cabin, though calm, radiated an unspoken acknowledgment justice had been restored, and dignity had been reinforced. Malik allowed a quiet, inward reflection. For years, He had endured subtle biases, assumptions, and dismissals. Every confrontation, every microaggression had built his patience, composure, and strategic awareness. This moment, small in a literal sense yet immense in principle, was the culmination of that experience, standing firm without aggression, asserting truth without spectacle, and allowing justice to emerge organically through observation, awareness, and the undeniable authority of integrity. The murmurs settled, applause softened, and the cabin returned to a tense calm, but one infused with awareness, reflection, and the subtle power of witnessing rightfulness. Malik's quiet authority had transformed a potential conflict into a lesson in morality, dignity, and social accountability. Every observer, whether recording or silently noting, had absorbed the impact. Vanessa Sterling, seated uncomfortably, recognized for the first time the weight of her misjudgment. She had been undone not by force, by rage, or by spectacle, but by the quiet, deliberate assertion of dignity and authority that Malik Jefferson embodied. The cabin, the passengers, the live stream audience all had witnessed entitlement confronted and dismantled with calm, deliberate integrity. The scene settled, but the impact would ripple far beyond row 2. Malik remained seated in 2A, composed, calm, and fully aware of the lesson imparted to everyone who had observed or would observe later. Justice had been served, instantly, quietly, and powerfully. The cabin's atmosphere was still thick with tension, though the conflict had reached its quiet resolution. Malik Jefferson remained seated in 2A, calm, composed, the rightful occupant once again. Vanessa Sterling slouched in her seat, her designer tote clasped tightly, the realization of her complete humiliation settling heavily on her shoulders. Every phone, every live stream, every murmur of acknowledgement bore witness to the outcome. The subtle hum of electronic devices, recording and streaming the moment, seemed almost deafening now. Jessica Alvarez, the journalist capturing the confrontation, leaned slightly forward, narrating quietly but urgently to her viewers. This is a lesson in composure, authority, and fairness. Malik Jefferson stood his ground, and the cabin witnessed it all. Respect was restored without a single shout. Comments scrolled rapidly. Finally, someone showing dignity in action. This CEO is calm but powerful. The entitlement exposed is unreal. Passengers who had previously whispered among themselves now exchanged subtle nods. Some offered quiet applause, others murmured soft words of affirmation. The social dynamics within the cabin had shifted dramatically. Observation had become a collective moral force, a recognition that entitlement could no longer dominate over rightful authority. Captain Thomas Reed, standing in the aisle near the front, cleared his throat. His gaze swept over the passengers, then lingered on Malik. He finally spoke, measured but firm. The corporate order stands. The situation will be addressed fully upon return to the gate. There was no attempt to appease Vanessa further. No ambiguous language, just acknowledgement of Malik's authority and the corporate mandate. Samantha Green, the lead flight attendant, finally exhaled, the tension in her shoulders relaxing slightly. She had seen the ethical implications of her initial bias play out in real time. The experience had left her shaken but enlightened. The importance of fairness and the consequences of subtle favoritism were now impossible to ignore. Vanessa, pale and subdued, stared at Malik as he collected his belongings, preparing to settle into his seat fully, Her attempts at dominance had failed completely, and the witnesses, both live and recorded, ensured that her humiliation would be shared far beyond the walls of the cabin. Phones tilted, live streams recording every subtle gesture of her discomfort, every flicker of frustration. Malik allowed himself a small inward sigh, a quiet acknowledgement that the moment had been resolved without aggression. He had exercised patience, composure, and strategic awareness, and it had yielded undeniable authority and respect. Yet he remained aware that the fallout extended beyond the cabin. Every passenger with a phone, every live stream viewer, every whisper of social media commentary would now carry the story far and wide. The cabin crew moved subtly, ensuring that passengers remained comfortable while also navigating the aftermath of a confrontation that had gone far beyond ordinary expectations. Samantha Green exchanged a glance with Captain Reed, both aware of the corporate implications and the lessons in ethical conduct that had just unfolded. As Malik adjusted his briefcase and jacket, he reflected briefly on the broader consequences. The incident, captured in real time, had become a catalyst for awareness, a lesson in respect and authority, and an example of how dignity could transform a volatile situation into one of moral clarity. Every observer, whether in the cabin or online, had absorbed the lesson entitlement could be challenged, patience could be powerful, and fairness could prevail. Vanessa, still reeling, attempted to regain some semblance of composure. Her lips pressed together, her hands gripping her tote. She looked around at the cabin, her eyes scanning the recording devices and live streams. She was beginning to comprehend that the social and professional ramifications were already unfolding. Every gesture and word had been captured, every reaction documented. Her arrogance, once absolute, had evaporated. Malik remained seated, posture upright, eyes calm. He did not gloat, did not raise his voice, did not make any gesture to dominate further. The authority he exercised had been quiet but undeniable. Passengers nodded subtly, whispering words of agreement, some murmuring reflections on the ethical lesson they had witnessed. The cabin had transformed from a stage of confrontation into a forum of moral awareness. Outside the cabin, the news of the incident spread rapidly. Social media feeds exploded with clips of the confrontation. Hashtags trending, Yak seat for respect, Yak justice at 30K feet. CEO stands firm. The commentary ranged from admiration of Malik's calm authority to criticism of Vanessa's entitlement. Within minutes, the story captured attention across platforms, drawing views in the tens of thousands. Malik's calm composure contrasted sharply with the viral sensation the incident was becoming. While others amplified the drama, he remained focused on principle, fairness, and the subtle assertion of authority. The lessons of patience and integrity, combined with the visible demonstration of dignity, ensured that the story resonated far beyond the flight itself. Passengers continued to murmur, some offering subtle applause, others sharing details discreetly with fellow travelers. The collective acknowledgement of fairness and respect had transformed the atmosphere in the cabin, even as the flight remained physically stationary. The moral victory was palpable. Vanessa Sterling, meanwhile, remained silent, the weight of observation pressing heavily upon her. The collapse of her entitlement was complete. Every passenger, every recording device, every live stream viewer had witnessed the moment when authority, patience, and fairness overcame arrogance. Her social dominance, long assumed and unchallenged, had been dismantled completely. Malik allowed himself a brief reflection on the broader significance. For years, he had encountered entitlement, subtle bias, and assumptions that diminished his authority. Today, he had demonstrated that composure, patience, and unwavering dignity could overcome these challenges. The lesson extended beyond a single seat, a single flight, or a single confrontation. It was a demonstration of principle, observable in real time, shared widely, and deeply instructive. Captain Thomas Reed finally nodded subtly, signaling to the crew that the situation was under control. Samantha Green adjusted her uniform, acknowledging the weight of the ethical lessons learned. Malik Jefferson remained calm, seated in 2A, embodying dignity and authority with every measured breath. The cabin, now quieter but charged with understanding, reflected the shift. Passengers whispered, adjusted their devices, and shared observations. Phones tilted, live streams continued, and social media feeds buzzed. The moment had passed, but its ripple effect was just beginning. The demonstration of fairness, authority, and dignity would resonate far beyond the aircraft itself. By the time Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847 began taxiing back to the gate, the incident had already started to ripple far beyond the cabin. Malik Jefferson remained seated in 2A, composed, calm, and fully aware of the consequences that were beginning to unfold. Every phone in the cabin was recording, every live stream sending waves across social media, and every whisper among passengers carried the story further into the world. Jessica Alvarez, capturing the moment live, narrated quietly but urgently. This is more than a seat dispute. Malik Jefferson, the CEO and majority shareholder, just demonstrated what authority and dignity look like in action. Watch how calm composure can dismantle entitlement and injustice. Comments poured in by the thousands. He's teaching a lesson in real time. This is the power of integrity. Respect isn't optional. Back at Pinnacle Airways headquarters, the corporate nerve center was buzzing with chaos. Screens across multiple offices displayed the live stream from the cabin. Executives, analysts, and staff crowded around monitors, the video looping as the tension played out repeatedly. The chief financial officer slammed his fist onto the table. "We're hemorrhaging value. If this ties into bias, the deal we've been negotiating will collapse." Meanwhile, emails and texts began flooding the executive team, forwarding the live stream clips with commentary and questions. The airline's public relations team scrambled, realizing that what had been a simple boarding dispute had erupted into a national story. Social media was ablaze. Hashtags like "Your Seat for Respect" and "Justice" at 30K feet were trending. Journalists and influencers across platforms were dissecting every second of the confrontation. In the cabin, passengers began discussing the wider implications quietly among themselves. "Did you see how calm he was?" one woman whispered. "That's how you handle injustice." A man nodded, murmuring, the dignity he maintained, unbelievable. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. Phones continued to record, live streams continued, and the energy in the cabin carried a subtle electricity, an awareness that something significant had occurred. Captain Thomas Reed had returned to the cockpit to prepare for the gate, but his mind remained tethered to the unfolding corporate implications. His earlier hesitation, his measured observation, had allowed Malik's quiet authority to manifest fully. Even he recognized the gravity of the demonstration. Samantha Green, the lead flight attendant, adjusted her uniform, reflecting quietly. She had witnessed the ethical implications of her earlier bias in real time, realized the weight of observation, and recognized how her initial actions could have allowed injustice to go unchecked. She took a deep breath, acknowledging internally that fairness required vigilance, courage, and adherence to principle. Malik, seated upright in 2A, allowed himself a private reflection. This was more than a personal victory. It was a demonstration of systemic principles, a live lesson in accountability, integrity, and the subtle but undeniable power of patience. Every observer, whether in the cabin or online, would carry away the lesson. The ripple effect would not stop at the airport. It would extend into corporate offices, newsrooms, and the broader society watching online. Vanessa Sterling, still trembling in her seat, now faced a reality she could neither control nor deny. Every passenger had witnessed her entitlement being dismantled. Every phone had recorded her failing composure, and every live stream had shared her downfall with thousands of viewers. The luxury and privilege she had assumed as unshakable were now exposed as hollow in the face of patient, deliberate authority. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, notifications began to flood executive devices, emails, texts, internal memos, and social media alerts. Pinnacle Airways' public relations team began drafting statements even before the plane came to a complete stop. Legal teams reviewed the potential implications of discrimination claims. Aware that the footage was not just viral, it was undeniable evidence of entitlement, bias, and the rightful challenge to it, passengers began quietly applauding as the aircraft came to a halt. Phones continued to tilt higher, capturing the unfolding moment, ensuring that the ethical resolution, the demonstration of calm authority, and the dismantling of entitlement were all preserved for a broader audience. Some whispered quietly to Malik as he remained seated, offering subtle acknowledgement of the lesson they had witnessed. Social media amplified the event immediately. Clips of the confrontation spread rapidly, with commentators praising Malik Jefferson's composure and criticizing Vanessa Sterling's entitlement. Analysts and opinion writers began dissecting the scenario, framing it as a teachable moment about dignity, authority, and the subtle exercise of power. The video went viral, trending across platforms, drawing national attention. Within Pinnacle Airways, executives faced urgent decisions. Immediate internal actions were required. Samantha Green was instructed to provide a full report of her involvement. Captain Thomas Reed documented his observations. Human resources and legal teams began assessing the potential consequences of staff behavior, passenger reaction, and public perception. Malik's patient, composed actions had forced the airline to confront systemic issues and enforce accountability. Passengers disembarked, some offering small nods, quiet smiles, or whispered words of approval. Malik walked slowly down the aisle, poised, his every movement deliberate. Phones and cameras captured the moment. Outside the cabin, the world was now watching in real time. The lessons of patience, composure, dignity, and authority had transcended the physical space of the plane, reaching far beyond it. Vanessa Sterling walked behind Malik, constrained by humiliation, aware that the world had observed her failure and entitlement dismantled. Every gesture she had made was now documented, every word analyzed, every reaction observed. The cabin, once the stage of confrontation, had become a symbol of accountability, fairness, and the transformative power of calm authority. Malik allowed himself a quiet, inward acknowledgement. He had not shouted. He had not gestured aggressively. He had allowed truth, fairness, and patient authority to manifest organically. And in doing so, he had ensured that the lessons would extend far beyond the immediate confrontation, inspiring reflection and accountability for anyone who witnessed or learned of the event. Corporate responses began to materialize even as passengers exited. Press releases were drafted, policies reviewed, and statements prepared to address not just the viral footage, but the underlying issues it highlighted. Malik's calm, deliberate authority had transformed a simple boarding conflict into a catalyst for corporate awareness and systemic reflection. The cabin, now emptying, still hummed with residual energy. Every glance, every phone tilt, every whisper had contributed to the shared experience of justice and accountability. Malik's quiet, measured approach had allowed the moment to teach broader lessons: dignity, patience, fairness, and the power of calm authority. By the time Malik Jefferson walked out of Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847, the world outside the cabin had already shifted. News crews, social media posts, and live streams had amplified the confrontation beyond the walls of the terminal. The quiet authority he had maintained, the calm patience, and the deliberate dignity had become a viral lesson in respect, fairness, and moral clarity. Passengers followed silently behind him, still recording, whispering to each other, sharing reflections. Some nodded with quiet admiration. Others murmured about the audacity of entitlement finally being dismantled. Even airport staff, observing from a distance, recognized the gravity of what had unfolded in that confined, elevated space. Vanessa Sterling, trailing behind Malik, carried the weight of her misjudgment. Her designer tote, once a symbol of power, now seemed trivial, almost irrelevant. She could feel the collective gaze of passengers, the scrutiny of cameras, and the judgment of those who had watched the live stream. Every gesture she had made, every condescending word had been recorded and amplified. Her world of assumed dominance had collapsed completely. Malik's expression remained composed, serene, and deliberate. He did not gloat, he did not scowl. His calm authority radiated outward, a silent lesson in dignity, integrity, and patient power. Each step he took down the terminal corridor was measured, a reflection of control, purpose, and unshakable self-possession. Outside the cabin, social media erupted. Clips of Malik Jefferson standing firm against Vanessa Sterling's entitlement spread like wildfire. Hashtags like "Ma Seat for Respect," "Aj Justice" at 30K feet, and "CEO Stands Firm" trended nationwide. News outlets replayed the footage, dissecting each gesture, each moment of composed authority. Opinion columns praised Malik's restraint and dignity, framing the incident as a teachable moment about leadership, patience, and the quiet power of integrity. At Pinnacle Airways headquarters, executives scrambled to respond. Legal and HR teams reviewed internal policies, assessing the impact of the viral footage. Samantha Green, the lead flight attendant, was called into an urgent briefing. She was instructed to provide a complete account of her actions and observations. Captain Thomas Reed documented the event formally, noting the decisive yet calm manner in which Malik asserted his rightful authority. The incident sparked immediate discussion across corporate circles. Boards of directors, management teams, and HR departments analyzed the viral footage, using it as a real-time case study in entitlement, ethical leadership, and customer service. Malik's measured approach became a model for conflict resolution, demonstrating that authority exercised with patience and integrity could dismantle bias more effectively than confrontation or aggression. Passengers who had experienced the event firsthand continued to share reflections, both in private conversations and on social media. A mother whispered to her daughter, "Stand firm, always. Dignity is more important than convenience." A young man, still holding his phone, added quietly, "Patience and composure can move mountains." These reactions rippled across networks, creating a broader awareness of the importance of respect and the subtle impact of ethical behavior in everyday interactions. Vanessa Sterling, still struggling with the aftermath, was acutely aware of the viral consequences. Her arrogance and entitlement had been captured in real time, scrutinized and dissected by millions. Her social reputation was damaged, her professional credibility questioned, and her personal composure shattered. Every gesture she had made in the cabin now served as evidence of her failure to recognize fairness and authority. Malik allowed a brief inward reflection. This moment, while personally significant, had become larger than any individual. It had highlighted systemic issues: entitlement, subtle bias, and the consequences of ignoring fairness. It had demonstrated how patience, composure, and quiet authority could influence behavior, enforce justice, and educate observers, both present and remote. The cabin crew, including Samantha Green, now understood the long-term significance. Their actions, decisions, and biases had been observed, documented, and analyzed. They would carry the lessons forward, implementing more thoughtful, equitable approaches in the future. Captain Reed's acknowledgement of corporate and ethical authority reinforced the broader impact. Malik's reflection extended further. He considered all those who had silently endured similar challenges in workplaces, social settings, and public spaces. The simple act of standing firm, asserting truth, and maintaining dignity was not just a personal victory. It was a signal to countless others. It was a lesson in courage, patience, and principled action, demonstrating that fairness could prevail even in high-pressure situations. Outside the terminal, cameras captured Malik's exit. The light of early evening glinted off the glass walls, reflecting a subtle aura of dignity. Passengers and staff who had observed him up close noted the quiet strength, the absence of arrogance, the measured composure that defined him. Malik's authority was undeniable, yet it had been exercised without aggression, without spectacle, allowing the truth of his position to resonate organically. Vanessa Sterling remained in the background, the consequences of her actions now tangible. She had underestimated patience, composure, and moral authority. Her attempt to assert dominance had collapsed completely under the quiet, steadfast presence of someone who embodied integrity, leadership, and dignity. The social, professional, and personal lessons were undeniable. Malik's calm, deliberate steps carried a message: authority and fairness were inseparable. Dignity was non-negotiable, and the quiet assertion of truth could influence not only immediate circumstances, but also a broader societal understanding. The viral incident would continue to circulate, serving as both a cautionary tale and a model of composure and principled action. Passengers continued to leave the terminal, phones in hand, sharing clips, recording reactions, and discussing the ethical implications. Social media amplified the story, journalists dissected the lessons, and corporate leaders reviewed policies, Malik Jefferson had transformed a moment of confrontation into a lasting educational example of authority exercised with dignity and patience. In private, Malik reflected on the deeper significance. Every microaggression, every assumption, every subtle act of bias that had confronted him over the years had prepared him for this moment. By maintaining composure, asserting authority without aggression, and demonstrating the power of integrity, he had created a lesson that extended beyond personal vindication. The cabin had witnessed more than a conflict over a seat. It had observed the quiet, powerful enactment of justice and moral authority. Passengers whispered, nodded, and shared stories, carrying the lesson forward. Vanessa Sterling's downfall became a symbol. The consequences of entitlement and bias made visible to all. Malik's presence, restraint, and unshakable integrity transformed a simple seating dispute into a narrative of fairness, patience, and ethical power that would resonate far beyond the confines of the aircraft. As Malik finally exited the terminal, the glow of city lights reflecting on his calm demeanor, he allowed himself a small, private smile. The moment was resolved. Justice had been served, and the broader societal implications had begun to ripple outward. This was more than a personal victory. It was a lesson in principle, integrity, and the enduring power of dignity. This story is more than a confrontation over a seat. It is a lesson in dignity, patience, and moral authority. Malik Jefferson's experience reminds us that fairness and respect are not negotiable. They are principles that guide our interactions, even under pressure. Maintaining composure in the face of bias demonstrates not weakness, but strength. In everyday life, whether at work, in public spaces, or within families, moments arise where entitlement and prejudice challenge our sense of justice. The lesson is to respond thoughtfully, assert your rights calmly, and let integrity speak louder than anger. By doing so, we not only affirm our own worth, but also set an example for others, inspiring accountability and awareness. Moreover, the story highlights the importance of being an observer and ally. Just as passengers, journalists, and crew played roles in witnessing and documenting the confrontation, our awareness and support in real-life situations amplify fairness and social justice. The ripple effect of one principled act can inspire systemic change, demonstrating that patience, clarity, and moral courage can transform not only personal encounters but broader social attitudes. Thank you for watching and joining us on this incredible journey. If this story inspired you or made you reflect on fairness and dignity, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful, real-life stories that reveal the truth behind everyday battles.